philosophy research on, like Dr. Goldberg said, natural law versus in vitro fertilization in regards to the significance of the parent-child relationship. So first I want to go into what IVF or in vitro fertilization is. Now, and specifically, it is the fertilization outside of the organism's body. Now, IVF was first conducted on live rabbits with the aid of the Worcester Biomedical Foundation. And in this essence, once it became successful, it was then used on couples who were suffering infertility. Now, in the same manner, the egg is fertilized outside of the woman's body and then pre-implanted in the hopes that she produces life. Now, I want to go into the procedure. Now, before even talking about the procedure, the woman actually has to take hormonal drugs to overstimulate her ovaries to produce mature eggs, and then the man has to provide a sample of sperm. Now, in the first step, if we look over to the left, the woman has to go through a transvaginal ultrasound aspiration procedure where the mature eggs are actually taken out of her ovaries. And then once this happens in a petri dish in a lab setting, the sperm and the egg are then fertilized. Now, once they are fertilized, they are monitored when it goes through cell division, and then once the embryo reaches a certain status, it is then pre-implanted into her uterine wall. Now, in many circumstances, there has been more success, specifically a 63% more success with women using IVF when they pre-implant more than one embryo. So in many of the cases of IVF, there is more than one embryo that is pre-implanted into her uterine wall. Now, when I found a lot of my research, I found that there was a lot of religious controversy over natural conception in IVF. And I secularized the religious concerns, and when I found the research, they talked a lot about this term natural law. Now, in general terms, natural law is the law of nature and how the law of nature governs all men. And in many of their concerns, their conception was found in the first presence when parents go through conception. And in terms of IVF, they say that when we use procreative science, we are actually manipulating our bodies in a sense, and we're overriding the natural process of sexual intercourse, which in some sense can actually hinder the parents, and it can lead to also hindering the child because they have some kind of psychological harm from IVF. Now, the main person that I isolated against was this man, Reverend Jerome Bracken. He is actually a philosophy professor now at Seton Hall University, and a lot of his research focuses on human rationale. Now, in his term of natural law, he focuses on the Catholic view. So natural law in this sense is God's rationality. And when he talks about IVF, he specifically focuses on how natural law correlates with the body being the epitome of what it means to be human. And he focuses on this Jesuit priest named Radner, who states, the body can and may be considered as a symbol, that is, the symbolic reality of man. And he states when we manipulate the body or use our bodies in a materialistic manner when we use IVF, we are actually using what it means to be a human being. And in terms of IVF, this can lead to a psychological harm. Now, in the process I had described, the woman has to take drugs to overstimulate her ovaries. The man essentially has to ejaculate into a cup to produce sperm. So in some sense, this can cause some emotional attachment when they go through the procedure, which can then lead to the child, especially if they tell their child that they were produced from IVF. He believes that they may see themselves as in a negative way when it comes to their identity, or they may see themselves as inhumane. And in the process, there is some embryo loss at the end also, so this can also affect the parents ultimately in the end. But even with this said, in answering my question of whether IVF affects the parent-child relationship, I don't see that conception or having to go through sexual intercourse really affects the child in some sense. So I found this research focused on at the gynecological clinic of the University Hospital of Erlangen in Germany, where Siegel and her colleagues, they did like an examination or questionnaire procedure on the first 16 IVF adults produced in Germany specifically. Now, one example of the questions was, what significance do you think being an IVF child has? And one of the IVF adults explained, well, it's natural, it's planned for, it's what you wish for. Well, that's what it is, isn't it? It's called a wish for a child. So in some sense, they didn't see any dissimilarity with themselves or any abnormality with the rest of society just because they were produced from IVF. And in the same sense, they felt wanted, they felt desired for. So even their parents going through such a strenuous process and rigorous process with IVF, they didn't feel that they were any different from children who were produced naturally. Now, and this goes into another research project that I found by Susan Gollenbach. Now, she's a philosophy professor at the University of Cambridge, and her main focus is on parents and how they influence child development. Now, in her research project, she actually isolates the parents and adolescent children who are at the ages of 5 to 8 years old, and they go through separate examinations. Now, the parents' examination focuses on almost like a questionnaire from the one before. So they were asked questions based on how they respond to their child's behavior, based on anxiety, protectiveness, dependability. And then the child was given a very specific exam entitled the Child and Adolescent Functioning and Environmental Schedule. Now, this examination tested their overall identity, or how they view themselves in their environment, and specifically like at school, with their parents, even within themselves in some circumstance. And this focused on how they felt, or Gollenbach focused on like trustworthiness with their parents, the warmth or affection, or the discipline that they felt with their parents. Now, if we look at this graph, this is specifically on the child assessment. Now, the whole assessment was graded on a 1 to 5 base scale. 1 having no influence on the child, 5 having an extreme, or in some sense, she focused on it being like a negative influence on the child. And there was a significant difference in p-values with sensitive responding, mother-to-child warmth, and dependability. Now, natural conception, or parents who naturally conceive, actually had a higher sensitive responding, which kind of showed that they can form some kind of responsive behavior and have a faster instinct with their children. But parents who were from IVF or used infertility circumstances that kind of went with IVF, they actually had a higher mother-to-child warmth or parent-to-warmth, and they had a higher dependability as well, which goes to show that IVF in some circumstance actually exceeds the variables of parents who naturally conceive, and they actually don't really show a dissimilarity between the parent and child. They actually have more of an attachment with their child in some circumstances, because the child is showing that their parent is dependable and has a good affection or warmth with them as well. Now, in the last piece of research that I found, I wanted to focus on procreative liberty. Now, in this sense, specifically Bonnie Steinbach's point of view on it. Now, she is a professor at the University of Albany, and her main focus is on bioethics, specifically on reproductive and genetics. Now, her sense of procreative liberty focuses on parenthood. And in some circumstance, like she states, I'm suggesting that the right to reproduce is not primarily a right to pass on one's genes, but the right to reproduce is rather a right to have one's own child to rear. So the natural right to reproduce also focuses on the parent's right, or the couple's right, to have that responsibility of being a parent and having a child and going through the process of parenthood. And in some sense, she says no matter the circumstance or technique, the same prerogative is the same, no matter what the creation is like. And if couples want to have that responsibility of their child, it shouldn't be neglected or taken away just because they use the process of IVF. And in conclusion, I truly believe that women have a natural right to reproduce no matter if they are infertile or fertile. And also, through my research, I found that there was no dissimilarity between the parent and child relationship, and it actually wasn't hindered through the process of IVF. In some circumstance, children who were reproduced from IVF actually felt that they were more attached with their parent because they go through such a strenuous process. And as well, I truly don't believe that sexual intercourse is a necessity to truly show how the parent and child relationship is hindered in the circumstances that Bracken brings up through his research. And thank you for your time.